The moment the conference room door opened, I felt something shift, not in the air or the room, but in that instinctive, animal part of myself that had been dulled by years of suits, memos, and 12-hour workdays. Martin Donnelly, the vice president of operations, a man whose wedding I once toasted with a smile and a stomach full of whiskey, gestured toward me with the kind of expression you wear when you're about to kick a dog that still trusts you. I didn't need an explanation, not yet, because there was something in the way his hand lingered, in the tightness of his jaw, in the shallow breath that gave away his discomfort. My body moved before my mind caught up, habit and obligation guiding my steps across the gray carpet toward the polished glass walls of the room where I had closed million-dollar deals, soothed volatile clients, and pitched visions that built this company from the ground up. Inside, the atmosphere was dry and brittle, as if words spoken too loudly might shatter the walls. Karen from HR sat at the table with a manila folder in front of her, her eyes fixed on the seal embossed in the corner as if the folder itself could do the talking. I didn't sit. Neither of them told me to. They weren't interested in my comfort. Martin folded his hands in front of him, but the gesture felt theatrical, like he had practiced it in front of a mirror this morning while rehearsing the script someone higher up had handed him. "We're letting you go, Ethan," Karen said, and though her voice was calm, it carried the finality of a sealed coffin. The words didn't explode like a bomb. They seeped in like water beneath a locked door, slow but impossible to stop. I blinked once, twice, waiting for some qualifier to follow, an explanation, a justification, anything that might tether their decision to some form of logic, but there was none. "Letting me go," I repeated, tasting the phrase like spoiled wine. "Why?" Karen reached for the folder with 2 fingers, as if touching it too long might leave a stain, and slid it across the table toward me. "The company's restructuring. Your position is being phased out as part of a wider strategy shift. This decision is final. Your severance is outlined here. You'll have 2 days to respond. We'll need your badge and all credentials before you leave the premises." "You're phasing me out?" I asked, the laugh that nearly followed quickly swallowed because I could tell they weren't even pretending this was real. "After 15 years, I'm being reduced to a line in a press release." Martin finally spoke, voice low, rehearsed. "It's not personal. It's business. You know how these things work." I looked at the folder without opening it, as if opening it would make it real. My mind began scrambling, searching for cracks, for an angle, for evidence that this wasn't what it looked like, but beneath all that desperate logic was something colder and sharper: betrayal. I knew these people. I had been with this company when it was a 3-person startup fueled by ramen noodles and Red Bull. I had sacrificed everything for it: my marriage, my health, my time with my son, all for the promise that what we were building mattered. And now, I was disposable. I left the room in silence. Nobody made eye contact. The office that had once felt like a second home now felt like an airport terminal, temporary, impersonal, filled with people passing through with headphones on and eyes down. My desk was already packed into a nondescript cardboard box, my coffee mug wrapped in recycled newspaper, my monitor unplugged and stacked like old tech no one cared to inventory. The security guard at the exit didn't even speak. He just held out his hand, and I dropped my badge into his palm. That evening, I sat in my apartment with the blinds drawn, staring at a dark screen that once opened windows into every corner of the company's infrastructure. I poured a drink with a heavy hand, not because I wanted to forget, but because I needed the edge taken off just long enough to think clearly. That's when I remembered something, small, forgettable at the time, but now burning in the spotlight of hindsight. A discrepancy in the budget report from last quarter. A 6-figure transfer to a marketing subsidiary that didn't match any existing campaigns. I had brought it up to Robert, the CFO, and he had waved it off like an uncle dismissing a child's curiosity. "It's internal cleanup," he'd said with a lazy grin. "You wouldn't want to get caught in the weeds." But I remembered. I remembered because I always remembered things that didn't add up. I opened my laptop. They hadn't revoked my access yet, which was their first mistake. I bypassed the surface-level dashboards and dug into the archive, the cold familiarity of raw data welcoming me like an old friend. I searched line by line through financial records, VPN logs, audit trails. What I found wasn't just suspicious. It was criminal. There were falsified expense reports, ghost vendor accounts, project approvals with my name on them, digital fingerprints forged with meticulous care. They hadn't just fired me. They had framed me. A chill settled in my chest. This wasn't about downsizing. It was a setup. And the deeper I went, the more obvious it became that this wasn't the work of a single person. It was a network, a quiet coalition of ambitious vultures cleaning house and positioning themselves before the audit next month. Robert's fingerprints were everywhere, but he was too smart to do it alone. Martin had likely known from the start. Karen had probably signed off the HR documentation under legal cover. And someone on my own team, someone I trusted, had fed them just enough to make it believable. My hand trembled slightly as I reached for my phone, not from fear, but from something far more dangerous: clarity. They thought I'd walk away broken, bitter, defeated. They thought they had written the final chapter of my story. But what they didn't know, what they had never understood, was that I don't quit. I rebuild. And when I'm finished, they won't just lose their jobs. They'll lose everything. The next morning began with the quiet hum of a plan forming in the shadows of my mind, shaped not by rage or impulse, but by the cold architecture of revenge sharpened by precision, calculation, and time. I had always been a man who lived in systems, networks, infrastructure, databases, but now I was designing a different kind of system, one built not to support, but to dismantle. The first step was anonymity, because if I showed my hand too early, they would bury me in paperwork, legal barricades, and character assassination campaigns fueled by public relations teams that knew how to scrub a conscience clean. So I changed my phone number, deleted all personal social media, and began building a new identity, one click at a time. They didn't know I still had access to a private mirror server, an undocumented sandbox we had used during a crisis 2 years ago when a ransomware threat had paralyzed half our systems. No one else had touched it since. No one else knew the credentials but me. From there, I accessed logs, patterns, metadata trails that stretched back months, even years. Every login, every approval, every fake transaction Robert had smuggled into the ledgers. I began tagging them one by one, building a quiet case. Each piece of brick in a wall I would eventually crush them with. But systems are only as secure as the people who use them, and I knew I couldn't trust mine. The betrayal cut deeper when I saw Dev's name, my second in command, the man who had once bought me lunch when I forgot my wallet during a client pitch, listed on the routing table of one of the false invoices. Not once, not twice, dozens of times. And the amounts weren't small. He wasn't just complicit, he was profiting. The realization hit like a slow, cruel needle pressed beneath the fingernail. He had smiled in my face while feeding them everything they needed to destroy me. Still, I needed more than logs and suspicion. I needed access to the internal whistleblower report system, the one buried beneath 6 layers of encryption, supposedly monitored by legal counsel alone. But without my company credentials, I needed a way back in. That's when I thought of Natalie. Natalie Park had been the silent backbone of the compliance team, sharp as glass and twice as unbreakable. We had once worked together on a data breach audit 2 years ago, and I had been the only one to publicly credit her with finding the root cause before it cost us millions. I didn't know if she remembered that. I didn't even know if she'd talked to me. But I had no choice. I waited outside the building's cafe that Friday afternoon, seated just far enough from the sidewalk to be invisible the most, but close enough to catch the morning traffic of employees slipping out for overpriced coffee and brief escapes. Natalie appeared like clockwork, her black coat wrapped around her like armor, earbuds tucked in, eyes locked on her phone as she scrolled through emails. I stood as she passed, speaking softly. "Natalie, it's Ethan." She froze, slowly removing one earbud, her face cautious but not hostile. "You shouldn't be here." "I know," I said, "but I need 5 minutes. That's all." She hesitated, then nodded once, almost imperceptibly, and led me around the corner where the noise of traffic dulled our words. "I didn't know they were going to do it like that," she said before I could speak. "HR said it was a strategic decision, but after you were gone, some things didn't add up. I need access to the secure compliance records." "I know that's asking a lot," I said, watching her carefully, "but I think I was framed. And if I'm right, it's bigger than just me." She sighed, crossing her arms, her breath visible in the chill. "I've seen strange flags in the routing tables, approvals that shouldn't have passed, timestamps that don't make sense. But I couldn't prove anything. And if they're really covering it up, The moment I raise my voice, I'll be next. I stepped closer, voice low and steady. You won't be. Not if I bring everything to light at once. But I need that system access. Just read only. Give me a window, and I'll do the rest. She looked at me for a long moment, calculating something behind her eyes, and then finally said, 1 hour. I'll generate a temporary audit credential. But if anyone traces it back to me, they won't, I promised. And when this is over, you'll be the one who stopped them. True to her word, she sent the encrypted credentials that evening, buried in a string of innocuous data points only I could decode. That night, as the city slept, I combed through every protected report, whistleblower complaint, and sealed memo. That's where I found it, the smoking gun. A complaint filed 3 months ago by a junior procurement analyst named Joel Singer. The report accused Robert of laundering project budgets through shell vendors and falsifying invoice approvals. The analyst had been placed on indefinite medical leave within a week and his access revoked. The report never made it to legal. It had been intercepted. Buried. They had done this before. I wasn't the first. I had just come too close to seeing what others had been paid to ignore. And now I knew how to burn the whole thing down. But fire attracts attention. I needed to be surgical. They had underestimated me because I built things. I optimized. I didn't scream. I didn't throw chairs. I designed clean systems, made chaos behave. They thought that meant I wasn't dangerous. They were wrong. This wasn't about getting my job back. It wasn't even about redemption. It was about making sure the people who had built their empires on the ashes of others felt the full weight of what they had done. I leaned back in my chair, the blue glow of the screen painting my face with the soft light of revenge. And somewhere deep in the company's protected core, I left a marker, quiet, encrypted, invisible to most, a signal that the clock had started. Tick. I never expected Joel Singer to open the door himself, not after everything I'd read. I assumed I'd find a ghost, a name buried under NDAs and legal threats. But when the apartment door creaked open to reveal a pale, jittery man in his early 30s, with eyes that twitched toward the hallway like he expected someone to be watching, I knew I wasn't looking at a victim. I was looking at someone still holding on by a thread. Ethan Hayes, he asked, voice low, almost suspicious. I nodded once, careful not to make any sudden movements. I read your report, Joel. The one you filed 3 months ago. The one they buried. He looked at me like I'd just recited a dream he'd been trying to forget. You shouldn't be here, he whispered, glancing over his shoulder again. They watch everything. My phone still lights up at night. Unknown numbers. I think they cloned my SIM. Let me in, I said, calm but firm. You're not crazy, and you're not alone. They did the same thing to me. He hesitated for one long heartbeat before stepping aside, motioning toward a cluttered living room filled with takeaway boxes, locked briefcases, and a single battered laptop sitting beneath a taped-over webcam. I didn't think anyone else saw it, he muttered, pacing the edge of the room like a caged animal. When the numbers stopped matching, I ran them twice. Then 10 times. I thought maybe I was sleep-deprived, that I was missing something obvious. But the vendors didn't exist. The invoice approvals were signed with fake timestamps. I flagged it to Robert. 2 days later, I was reassigned. A week after that, HR called me in and said they'd noticed signs of psychological strain. Said I needed a break. They shut off my access and promised severance if I didn't speak to anyone. You were too close to the core, I said, sinking into the couch. They needed you silent. Joel crouched in front of his laptop, typing rapidly, fingers shaking. I kept backups. Not everything, but enough to make a pattern. They used the same laundering method, triangulated routing, shell vendor IDs, looped through dormant subsidiaries. It's smart, but not perfect. I watched the code scroll down the screen, the data confirming what I already suspected. Robert hadn't just orchestrated one financial crime. He had turned the company into a laundering machine, bleeding funds under the radar while feeding corporate growth numbers to keep shareholders dazzled. We bring this to the board, Joel said. Anonymous drop. Blow it wide open. They won't believe it, I said. Not without a name. Not without a face. And they've made sure anyone who speaks up looks insane or bitter. That's how they win. They turn people like you into footnotes. Joel sat back, rubbing his temples. Then what? The SEC? Internal audit? No, I replied. We go to the person who started this mess. The founder. Olivia Mercer. Joel blinked. She's been silent for a year. Since she handed operations over to Robert, she vanished. She doesn't even hold majority control anymore. She owns 29%, I said. Enough to make a board meeting happen if she wants it. And I have a feeling she doesn't know what they've turned her company into. Even if we found her, how do we get her to listen? Joel asked. I reached into my coat pocket and pulled out a printed photo, the only image I'd found that still connected Olivia to the company. A corporate dinner from 2 years ago, when I'd fixed a network issue during a storm and ended up seated across from her. In the background of the photo, Olivia was smiling at someone out of frame, a rare moment of ease. I know where she lives, I said. And if I show her what we found, she'll have no choice but to act. She built this company from nothing. She won't let them bury it in corruption. Joel didn't look convinced. And if she doesn't care? If she's part of it? I stood slowly, voice quiet but steady. Then we expose her too. It took 3 days to track her down. Olivia Mercer had traded boardrooms for vineyards, living on a sprawling estate outside the city where phone reception was optional and visitors were rare. I left messages. I sent certified letters. I parked outside her private gate and waited. It wasn't until the 4th day, when the rain turned the gravel to mud, that her assistant came down the long drive and rolled down the window. She doesn't take meetings anymore, he said, stone-faced. Tell her this is about Robert Vale. I answered, handing over the sealed packet with every flagged invoice and every forged approval. And tell her she still has one chance to do the right thing. I expected silence. I expected the packet to disappear into a drawer and never resurface. But 2 days later, I received a phone call from a number with no ID. A woman's voice. Clipped. Controlled. I want to meet. Alone. The following evening, I found myself standing in the vineyard's main hall, the scent of aged wood and oak barrels filling the space like history refusing to fade. Olivia Mercer sat at a long table, glass of dark wine in her hand, eyes fixed on the pages spread before her. She didn't look up when she spoke. This is a war, she said, and you've handed me the first missile. I want Robert removed, I said, and I want my name cleared. But that's not all. Everyone who helped him, Karen, Martin, Dev, they go down too. No deals. No retirements. No golden parachutes. Finally, she looked at me. Her eyes were tired, but underneath the exhaustion was steel. Do you know why I left, Ethan? I assumed they pushed you out. She smiled coldly. No, I walked. I built something with purpose, and then I watched as they turned it into a machine for their own profit. They told me it was evolution. I called it erosion, but I never had proof. Until now. I leaned forward, voice tight. Then let's finish it. She nodded once. Board meeting. Thursday. Noon. You'll be there. And so will Joel. Bring everything. I didn't sleep that night, not out of fear, but because the tide was shifting. The plan was moving. The reckoning had begun. Thursday arrived with the stillness of a storm's eye, the kind that lulls you into believing the worst has passed, when in truth it's only paused to draw breath. I wore no suit, no tie, nothing to mimic civility, because today wasn't about presentation. It was about confrontation. Olivia had scheduled the emergency board meeting using her retained authority as founder and largest individual shareholder, a technical power the others had forgotten in their hunger for control. They couldn't legally block it, and they hadn't tried. That unsettled me more than silence. It meant Robert thought he could spin this, thought he could bury us under polished phrases and falsified audits just like he had done before. Joel was already waiting in the glass-walled lobby, eyes dark-circled, gripping a flash drive like it was the last piece of a crumbling raft. He didn't speak when I arrived, just nodded once, tight and grim, and followed me through the elevators in silence. The top-floor conference room had once felt like a cathedral, gleaming, sunlit, powerful, but now it felt like a courtroom. Inside, the full board sat along one side of the long walnut table, their postures rigid, their eyes narrowed. Robert stood at the head, still impeccably dressed, a calm smile painted across his lips like armor. Beside him sat Martin and Karen, their faces neutral but carefully unreadable. Across from them, Olivia Mercer sat alone, her expression colder than any of theirs, her fingers lightly tapping the armrest as if timing the meeting with a metronome no one else could hear. I stepped forward without invitation, without preamble, and placed a stack of printed records in front of each board member. Logs, receipts, falsified vendor trails, ghost authorizations. Then I turned to Robert, who was already smiling like a man amused by the desperation of others. Before you say anything, I began, let me make this clear. I don't care about my job. I don't want my title back. I don't want a payout. I want the truth to surface, and I want everyone in this room to know who built this company and who's been bleeding it dry. Robert chuckled softly, the sound like ice cracking under weight. Ethan, it's good to see you haven't lost your passion for theatrics. But if you're trying to intimidate anyone with a packet of spreadsheets, I'd suggest you refresh your understanding of corporate law. I understand it just fine, I said. So does the SEC and the internal audit team at Meritus Capital, both of whom have received copies of this evidence. You can stonewall the board, Robert. You can even manipulate the press. But forensic accountants don't care about your press releases. They care about anomalies. And you've left plenty. Karen leaned forward then, lips thin. Even if this were true, and I'm not saying it is, presenting confidential internal data to third parties is a breach of your severance agreement, Ethan. That alone opens you to litigation. I looked at her, then at Martin, then back to Robert. It's cute how you still think this is about corporate policy. You lied. You laundered funds through non-existent subsidiaries. You framed me to protect your scheme. You tried to silence Joel. You think you own this building, this company, these people, but you don't. Not anymore. Olivia stood slowly then, and the room fell so silent you could hear the soft creak of leather chairs shifting. Her voice was calm, almost gentle, but the weight it carried was undeniable. I've reviewed the documents. I've cross-referenced the transactions. I've spoken with 2 former auditors who left without explanation under Robert's tenure. What I see is a pattern of deception, theft, and manipulation. What I don't see is any defense, only deflection. Robert's mask didn't crack, but his smile faltered just enough to expose the tension in his jaw. With all due respect, Olivia, I am still acting CEO, and this entire ambush borders on defamation. You're letting a disgruntled former employee manipulate a personal vendetta into a narrative of scandal. Joel stood then, shaking but steady. You sent people to my apartment. You spoofed my phone. You called my mental health into question because I wouldn't lie. Don't talk about narratives. You wrote the script, Robert. We just learned to read it. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Olivia turned to the board. I am exercising my right to call for an immediate vote of no confidence. All in favor of removing Robert Vale as CEO effective immediately, raise your hands. It wasn't unanimous. Martin and Karen kept their hands flat on the table, eyes locked ahead like statues awaiting orders. But the others, 3 of them, raised their hands without hesitation. And with Olivia's own vote, it was enough. Robert didn't shout. He didn't threaten. He simply stood, adjusted his cuffs, and said, "This isn't over." "No," I said, stepping forward. "It's just beginning." He turned and walked out, followed closely by Karen, whose silence was louder than any protest she could have made, and Martin, who looked less like a man losing power and more like one losing oxygen. Outside, the sun had dipped low, and the city had begun to flicker with lights that seemed softer than they had the day before. Joel and I stood for a long moment without speaking. "You think that'll hold?" he finally asked. "They'll try to survive it," I said. "Spin it. Rewrite the truth. But the audit teams won't care. And I've got more copies stashed than they'll ever be able to erase." Joel nodded slowly, then said, "So what now?" I looked out over the skyline. "Now we make sure it hurts." 3 months later, the building was still there, same steel and glass stretching into the clouds like ambition frozen in concrete. But the people inside had changed. Robert was gone, though his name lingered in quiet legal footnotes and whispered hallway rumors. Karen disappeared 2 weeks after the vote, resigned to pursue new opportunities, though some said she left the country. Martin fought back at first, filed an appeal with the board, then withdrew when the audit team found his signature on 3 fake consulting contracts. They'd all tried to wash their hands, but the ink had sunk into the skin. As for me, I never went back. Olivia offered me a senior advisory position, a fat salary, public praise, even an apology crafted by professionals, but I turned it all down. Some structures aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some ghosts should be left where they fell. Joel accepted a role with the Regulatory Commission, working on internal fraud investigations. He said he wanted to keep digging, to make sure no one else went through what we did. He looked better now. He shaved. He smiled sometimes. But I saw the weight in his eyes, the knowledge that the truth, once seen, can never be unseen. Olivia stayed. She restructured the company with surgical precision, cut the bloat, opened up the books, and turned board meetings into brutal forums of transparency. Investors respected her. Employees feared her. But behind her eyes, I saw something colder than victory. I think she realized too late what her silence had allowed to grow. She hadn't just left a company in their hands. She'd abandoned a garden and come back to find poison in every root. There was a final meeting, just her and me. In the vineyard, no pretense left between us. I read your final report, she said, pouring wine into 2 glasses without asking if I wanted any. You could have kept digging. Exposed more. Why stop where you did? I watched the sunlight filter through the glass, casting blood-red streaks across the table. Because revenge has gravity. Pulls you deeper than you meant to go. If you don't know when to stop, you become what you were fighting. She smiled, but it wasn't joy. It was recognition. And do you think you stopped in time? I stopped before I lost myself completely, I said. That's the only kind of when people like us get. She raised her glass in a toast that felt more like a funeral. To half victories. I didn't drink. I just nodded. That night, I drove away without saying goodbye. Now I live smaller, quieter. I freelance, fix broken systems for companies that still believe integrity means something. I spend weekends with my son. We talk more now. I cook him real meals. I watch his eyes light up when I actually show up. He still asks why I left the company. I tell him the truth, or at least enough of it. And sometimes, when the city is quiet and the lights flicker through the blinds just right, I think about what I did. Not with regret, not with pride, just with clarity. Because in the end, revenge isn't fire. It's shadow. It doesn't roar, it waits. It doesn't rage, it whispers. And once you've walked in it, it never fully leaves you.